One small pickup from last time, when we were mentioning that real thinking can't lie, and amongst the other conditions and expansions I put on lie, was also consider that the idea of lie is beyond not only any sense of morality or any sequential logic or any linear expectations. One definition or one description I didn't give is you could look upon from a subversive way lying as being an extreme personal waste of energy. That's what it would be to someone attempting to think in a new way. It would be wasting your time. That's what lying would be to you personally. It would be your own neural system, that is your own thinking, wasting your time. You didn't like that. Did you thought of something, and if, you got to pretend if now, that if in some way you could think about your own thinking in an unordinary way, is you would have this thought and you'd think, Jesus, what a waste of time. In other words, ordinary thought. You've had 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or even 50 minutes. It's just a bad of not that old stuff again. Now that would be a more functional or operational definition of lying. That is the kind of thought that would lead you back to that same place of vested intellectual interest. Back to the land of polarization. It doesn't matter where you got to there. It would be wasting your time because it would be back to some predictable area. You could say for a revolutionist thinker it would be, if there was such a thing, it'd be the supreme immorality. Not the kind of morality that ordinary people, ordinary thought would have lying to be. The reality behind what they call lying. Having cleared that up to the satisfaction of all dethroned Episcopal priests, let's go back to where we had to cut off the tape last time. Those of you that find out there watching this that sometimes it's kind of jerky or rough, sometimes the tape gets cut at the end. We have a Moyer here and he doesn't know what he's doing sometimes. I kind of liked it. Well, never mind. Who cares what I like? Back to where we were, if you remember, we were talking about another chi root, a reconnaissance of another chi root that said that ordinary thought can only believe in that which it cannot see, not that which it can see, not that which you would normally expect such a sentence to lead to. And to remind you that this situation, assuming I can make you agree that there is some validity, do note that this situation is not an error. It is the natural basis of many things absolutely necessary to the functioning of civilized, contemporary, secondary life. That ordinary thought being driven to believe in one sense, they can only believe in that which it cannot see, is the basis for such irreplaceable aspects, operations as religion, as all morality, in a sense, in a wider sense, of civilization itself. Not what you would normally think if you were just following the sentence in the beginning. It is not, we're not speaking about strange people who believe that Martians are talking to them. We're not talking about even people that would be religious in a fairly ordinary sense, that believe that there is some extrinsic force, some God, some Allah somewhere, compared to a more, just in an ordinary sense, in a more hard-nosed, humanistic sense. The people nowadays, parts of life's body represented by people, would point at religious people and say, you're outdated and that's ridiculous. And they would say, they would expect the sentence was going to say that ordinary thought can only believe in that. And they would think that it should say that which it can see. Because it's unordinary thought, it's substandard thought to believe in that which you can't see. That a good, up-to-date, modern, sophisticated, blah, blah, blah person would only believe in that which he can see, literally, and of course figuratively, in the sense of intellectually, rationally, that you can see something even if you just read about it. That you read of subatomic experimentations that have proven or have helped support certain theorems regarding the nature of matter. Now, you can't go see it. but you are reading it in a respected journal. You know enough to know that things do not get printed in physics today unless there is some validity. So when I say things you can see, it is in the factual sense. But that is still not it. The subtle twist to it is that the operations of civilization itself, the progression of progress itself, is based upon the fact that ordinary intelligence, ordinary thinking, can only believe that which it can't see, not which it can see. And remembering this is not an error, try to hold that as we attempt to twist your heads a little more than we had time last time to see that there is a use for this. Not beyond the ordinary, not just the ordinary, but in a sense for you to be able to see it and then to do something beyond that. Let's try it this way. Were it not for the fact that the ordinary intellect can survive on a diet that is absolutely deficient in conclusions, then the intellect of man could have never developed. Now, if we jump back right quick and say that, fill in that which would normally be expected by my set-up sentence, that the ordinary thought can only believe that rather than that which it can see, and I said that which it can't see. Let's take the other view that it should be, well, that which it can see. That would be the right on course. Think about it. What if the human intellect, civilization itself, the secondary world of man, if it had been absolutely dependent upon that things could not progress? And by things, I mean my left hand. No. Man. There's no such thing as civilization without man. There's no such thing as progress without man. So, man himself, individually and collectively, could not have progressed if his thought, which is the only way he's progressed. Remember, we've established that we're not talking about a primary evolution of man. Because even though you may be a little taller, a little healthier, and a lot uglier than your forefathers, we're not talking about a physical, that is a primary evolution of man, that we're not slowly growing, insofar as anyone can tell, a new hand, a new arm, a new nose, new naughty part, so that you could have twice as much fun. It is not that. It appears that for all intents and purposes that we have physically kind of stabled out. The progress of man has been in the secondary, here at the end of the nervous system. But now think about it. This would not have moved. There would be no progress, there would be no civilization if this, back to their own definition of it, if this was dependent upon what it says it is. Proof, evidence, conclusions. Which from one view, and I'll do it right quick, is correct. How else can you even speak of technology, science, unless things can be dependent on? That you can, if nothing else, that you know that you can go home and turn on a switch and the lights come on. The heat comes on. Your computer comes on. So there is a kind of obvious, linear logic, sequential expectations that there seems to be conclusions, that there are things upon which you can depend, or civilization would move. Right, that's true. Except for this. It's not really conclusions. That if man was absolutely dependent, not physically, not just in the physical world, not just the primary world, but if man's intellectual development, the evolution of the secondary world, if it indeed literally were dependent upon reaching conclusions and certainties, we would all still be living like, I don't know, peanut farmers in Tennessee, cavemen, even worse, whatever that would be. There would be no civilization. The diet of man intellectually is unnoticed. I'll agree to that. Unmeasured, but it is suffering, from our view, a supreme deficit of conclusions. Has that had any effect? No. Because, from another view, what I just said, from another view, he has a surplus. Well, he has adequate conclusions. Because I've already proved it. That there are adequate, we know how to hook up, we know how to produce. You can keep going back and back. But we know how to produce, how to generate AC energy alternating current. We can go out and build these. We can raise taxes. We can raise funds, and we go build these. We can run lines to your house. We can hook up the residential power. We can build switches. We know how to raise the voltage up and down, so that there are conclusions that you say, well, what we need is to have electricity at a safe voltage in a dependable, furnished in a dependable way to each and every house, and to businesses, but let's say we need that. All right, taken in that context, thought can reach conclusions because we can go build generating plants. We can run wires. We can get electricity to your house in a fairly safe and dependable manner. So you could say that, well, we can reach conclusions. There are individuals, and certainly groups of individuals, but they're probably individuals that can actually plan, lay out the plan all the way from the beginning of building a dam somewhere, finding some way to actually harness natural energy to start producing electrical current, know how to wire a house, do all that, and you can say, well, we can reach a conclusion. That's true. But from another view, there are no such things as conclusions in the secondary world, because if there were, the secondary world would be terminal. Things would not have gone as they have gone. Things would have stopped somewhere. Life would not still be growing. So there is the appearance of illusion. Of conclusions. And in a 3D world, it is easy enough because you keep turning around, and if you go far enough in one direction, height-wise, and you go another direction breadth-wise, and you go another way depth-wise, you can go, well, hey, I've covered it, and you're right. But is it a conclusion? No. Is it a dead end? No. It is the tricky part that for all functional purposes, the mind can apparently reach conclusions. They work here. But it's not a conclusion. If it was a conclusion, then you're back to, all right, we can make one thing work, or one idea work. I get an answer to one question, and that would have been it. You, that is civilization, that is the intellectual development of man, that is the secondary evolution of man, would have stopped. We would have dropped dead. And so you have what amounts to simultaneously, apparently, workable, functional conclusions, and yet there is an extremely poor diet of conclusions in the intellectual development of man. If it were not so, then man could believe in what he sees, and that would be it. But he can't. He's got to believe in that which he can't see, or else he wouldn't press on. But the easy shot, if you think you're getting more confused than ever, the easiest shot that I picked out was that certain parts of humanity now can attack other parts for being so outdated that they believe in spirits, gods, religions. That's not much of a knock. If you found the people who would make such an attack and ask them, well, what's the alternative? Or how have we progressed? Where are we now? And what would they tell you? Well, from the best possible verbal view, we could say that someone who would attack superstition, outdated religious ideas, or they might say all religious ideas are outdated. Okay. Who would be an archetypical possible source for such an observation? How about a good, hard-nosed, Harvard-educated scientist, a physicist? And what do they deal with? And wait a minute, a physicist, wait a minute, you're not going to pull that crowd and say that we believe in things we can't see because we're dealing in subatomic particles and stuff like that. You're not going to do that, are you? Was I going to do that? See, I don't have to. You can't believe in what you see. You can, in passing, sort of accept part of it, but you can't believe in it. That is, you can't look and say, oh, so that's it, eh? Well, I'll die. The ordinary intellect, all the way from science to religion, which about covers it. Of course, taking into account short order cooks in there somewhere. But from science to religion, the ordinary intellect does believe in all the things that it accepts but cannot see. All of the things like It accepts them. It says it. It defines it, and yet it can't see it. Such things as causes, certainties, and conclusions. And I'm not going to stop and play some verbal, useless game on science, but they are as, and not them institutionally, I'm just using that as an example that would seem far removed from superstition and mythology and religion, but they are as subject to what I have just noted as superstitious, illiterate savages somewhere, religious people, that they are still dealing with that and accepting that which they cannot see. How about a new theorem? Why not? It came with a coat. It was in the pocket. I found it. And it would say that the more civilized, well, how about this? How about a new word instead of a new, in addition to a new theorem? This came in the coat pocket of the theorem, a new word. The more civilized, and here's the word, secondaryized. Secondaryized, yeah. Get it? Secondaryized, which is being civilized. But the more civilized a person is, the more disposed they are to look for and accept facts. That is, things they can't see in preference to acts. Think about it. I'm about to say think about it, and then if you're ordinary and you listen to the rest, it sounds like, wait a minute, boy, that's an attack on being civilized. And those of you who have been listening, you know it's not. But that is a definition. I still haven't got to the epilogic punchline. But the more civilized a person is, the more they are just automatically disposed to look for, search for, to accept facts, things they cannot see, in preference to acts. And what I was going to add was say, think about it. To prefer facts over acts. So much for the dramatics and the theatrics. But notice, back from an ordinary level, if we were ordinary intelligence listening to this and trying to think, well, what the hell does this mean? You could say, well, that is being civilized. Why did you put some sort of, I heard an inflection in your voice. It sounded like there was something amiss here. That to be civilized is to prefer facts over acts. All right. But how about this? You can't go far enough to reach a real conclusion with that, because you'd have to say, well, as people have done throughout the ages in dreaming of heaven, very common for people to dream of some form of paradise wherein that they are cut off from the brainstem down. Boy, wouldn't that be heaven? Never put on weight, never get fat, never get horny, and then get turned down all the time just because you're ugly. Oh, how great it would be to live a mystical life, a poetic life, that I was just a living brain, and that all brains looked alike, and nobody could look at me and say, boy, you're an ugly brain. Or that my brain tried to pick up this other girl's brain, and she looked at me and says, that's all there is to you? You know, like... In other words, you cannot take that conclusion, except they do it in fiction, they do it in dreams, but you cannot go to some conclusive extreme and say, well, yes, it would be good, or it would be preferable to have facts, to live for facts, to deal in facts as opposed to acts. It could be a hobby. Nothing against facts. But do note, as long as you're living here on this splendid little planet that seems to be confined within a three-dimensional box, I assume you have noted, you cannot live without acts. You cannot live without eating, without sleeping, without keeping your body within certain environmental balances. And, of course, the race cannot live without getting down, without dropping your knickers and doing whatever people do in private. So it is impossible, it's not even a question of saying that you can get away from acts. But back to my terrifying theorem, that the more civilized, the more secondaryized you are, the more you prefer, the more you seek out. You don't think about it. Nobody's even ever pointed out, but you are driven to seek out You look for them. That's what you want, without using these terms, of course. And you prefer facts over acts. The more civilized. This doesn't mean everybody, because there are plenty of people around that would much rather get drunk, have a good screw, and fall down and take a nap on the couch. There's still plenty of people like that in the world, and nothing wrong, but there's still plenty of people like that in the world. Believe it or not, I know some of you would prefer to do that than to go sit in a straight back chair and read the collected works of Milton or Hobbes. I mean, there are. I mean, it's just that's the way life does not operate the tidal waves of life are somewhat irregular. So it's not that everyone is that level, but do note, because although you can still, I'll say theoretically, that you could still read, John Bunyan and have a beer and get down. We'll just say theoretically. So it's not a matter of either or, but do note besides acts, besides getting down and having a roll on the floor, taking a nap and all that, having a good meal. That notice that we'll assume that all of you hearing this are civilized, just in the ordinary sense, back at your old ordinary neural site, that you are civilized enough that that is not sufficient to entertain you in life. You don't think about it, it's just not sufficient. And you seek out things of a more secondary nature, the arts, music. What it amounts to is you are feeding this, the world of facts, no matter how you do it. But notice that life would not be satisfactory to you individually if that's all it was screwing, eating, and sleeping. Just people nowadays, the more you're civilized, is why I put it that way. It's not everybody, because there are people, as part of life's body, that are more or less satisfied with that. But the more civilized you are, the less you can be satisfied at that level. The more you seek what would it seem like artistic, emotional, civilized, intellectual stimulation. Back to the theorem. The more civilized you are, the more you are disposed to seek out, without knowing it, without analyzing it, without planning it, but the more you are disposed to seek out and accept facts in preference to acts. Trying to make that metaphorically and then symbolically or vice versa plain enough symbolically. It gets to be more than symbolic, where the usefulness comes in for a few people. But take another definition. Could you not say that another operational, albeit subversive definition of civilization would be this? Are you ready? Being civilized. It's the ability to turn your back on the obvious. To be truly civilized, there you are in the parlor, there you are visiting in the governor's mansion, and you're standing next to a senator, and there's suddenly a very rude noise issues from a lower part of someone's anatomy nearby, the senator's wife. To be civilized, as you turn your back, you ignore it. You make no mention of some congressional zephyr crusher that floated through the room. You show no sign, you don't take any apparent acknowledgement of that god-awful smell. It does seem accidentally picked out a pretty crude and obvious example, but hey, what better examples than crude and obvious? Now back to me asking, I was trying to get down to a practical level, is not being civilized. Now expand civilized to the whole operations of the secondary aspect of your nervous system individually. But if you want to look out, is why I use ordinary life, as though I had a choice, to use it as an example. What is being civilized out there institutionally on a wide level and you individually? What is being civilized? How can you find fault with that definition, that being civilized? Now forget this as being a cultural matter. We're talking about that you are more driven by the factual secondary world in you. That's being civilized. Remember, the more civilized you are, the more you accept, even seek out facts as opposed to acts. Then I went from there to another definition, an operational definition of civilized, is being able to turn your back on the obvious. Do you see that connection between that and the preference, the disposed attitude of one's mind, one's being, personality speaking, to prefer facts over acts, to turn your back on the obvious? That the more civilized you are, the more you are driven to ignore the obvious. I'd like to ask, why, forget the rude noises and the smells, suddenly somebody says, do you know that our senator, this a few hours later, they're still in the governor's mansion, the party's thinned out, and they're down to pulling out some of the good JV CDs, and everybody's getting down, and finally, this senator, for whom, let's speak just theoretically, for whom you had some respect, and etc. earlier, is now over there and getting kind of sketchy. And somebody finally says, do you realize, it's not known, but hell, it's just here, us insiders, that so-and-so is a drunk. The man is just sloppy drunk, and somebody says, why is he a drunk? What is being civilized? Now, I keep using these kind of examples. I did it last time. If you don't like that, if I get too cloudy, it's just two civilized people talking. And some says, why do you think Mrs. Jones, their fine son, Hubert, I mean, there he is, he got a scholarship to Princeton, but you know he keeps getting arrested. The boy is an alcoholic. Why? Why? Being civilized, that is being driven more and more by the secondary mind, is to turn your back on the obvious. You've got to be able to ignore the obvious. Not that it's right. I'm not saying we're not supposed to go back in some way, even if you could. Remember the Kairut tonight that got such an overwhelming, just almost a typhoon of silence. That one guy did walk back home to no profit. Kairut started to make that when one guy did walk back home to no avail. And I thought, Kairut thought, well, hell, people are hipper than that. To no profit. You can't go back. It's not that suddenly you should turn and be uncivilized. You know that's not it. It's not that there is some greater validity to say, well, why is this guy a drunk? And the joke, I'll call it a joke for you civilians that may be watching this accidentally. And the joke was that in times past, your grandmother, if they'd said, why is that guy a drunk? And they'd say, well, because the son of a bitch drinks too much. What else are you going to say? It's not that that's right, because even though that is operationally correct from one level, or even though it's correct, let me put it another way, it is now, in a secondary level, almost, it's hobbled to such an extent that it's inoperative. How was that? In other words, you can't be civilized. You could not be staying around with civilized people nowadays. And if they talked about, well, Professor so-and-so, even though he had tenure, do you realize they've had to they put him on an unpaid leave? What happened? Well, you don't know he's just a drunk. Well, what do you think causes it? And now you're staying around. Some way you got on the faculty there and you turn around and say, well, I don't know the man, but I tell you what makes somebody drunk is they drink. You're not going to be invited to many of the faculty teas. They're just going to consider, how did you get a job? Hey, what are you doing here at the university? You're not civilized. You understand? It's inoperative. And so I'm not saying go back. It's not right or wrong. But from one view, and this is not the point of all this, but I'm just using the kind of examples again that are blatant enough that can even make you titter. And you better watch it. The titter police was by here earlier, and they asked for names, but he wouldn't admit. He wouldn't confess. It's not that the old one is right of pointing out the obvious, but I just want you to see that the more civilized you are, that is, the more that life develops in the secondary realm of man up here, the more he becomes civilized, the more he is driven by facts. The more he is civilized and driven by facts, the more he can absolutely turn his back from one view. Not a right view, but from one view that was at one time operative enough that you can hear me say it, that he can turn his back on the obvious. Why is this person an alcoholic? Why is this person a drunk? Why is this person living When is this person out of work? To take anything that would seem to be obvious, and nowadays has social cause and etc., which is the new definition. It's a new reality. It's the better one now. It is the correct one. But the more civilized you are, you turn your back on the obvious. And if that got too obvious, how about back to the social of you being there in a very high-class affair? And suddenly, there's this terrible smell, an unmistakable smell, and you're standing next to the senator's wife. You do not turn around and say, "Hey, babe, you really cut it, didn't you?" And not just through fear that you're going. You can't help it. To be civilized, you turn your back more and more on the obvious. What would seem to be, and now obvious, if you can stretch it a little bit, is getting closer, relatively speaking, would be closer to erstwhile acts than facts would. One more time, as all of you should know, it's not right or wrong, and it's not a cry backwards. Here we go, let's all band together and run backwards. No. But see, the thing about the mechanical progression of man is, as long as you're swept along, you don't know what's been going on. And wherever you are, you think, yes, this is where I should be. Or either you think, boy, this is not where I want to be, which is the same thing. Well, because you're dealing with localized preference. That, well, yes, I only have two choices. I'm proud to be here, as Solomon Burke used to be, or I'm not proud to be here. Big deal. Yes, but one of those is correct. Yeah, but you can uncorrect it. I hate to be alive. Well, that's the easy position, because you have certainly got fate in your hands, as opposed to someone who's not alive that says, well, I wish I was alive. You follow? But if you're only conscious, if you're only thinking at wherever life is moving, wherever you are right now in the parade, that you're there and you're shoulder to shoulder, rank and file, and you can't move and everybody's marching. Yeah, you can do anything you want to back there in the middle. The parade's as wide as you can see. It's everywhere. And you can be back there kibitzing all you want to and bitching about, boy, I don't like it back here. Or you can holler, I love it back here. You can holler anything you want to. And you can threaten. You can say, boy, as soon as they slow down or as soon as I get a New York chance, I'm going to break out of here. I'm going to get up in another row. You can say anything you want to, but do notice this. For 67, 72 years, you can complain about the music, you can complain about the weather, you can say, something stinks around here. I don't like being back in this part of the parade. It smells bad back here. You can say anything you want to, but notice. That is ordinary intelligence. That is preferring facts over acts. That is being able, as you should, and more, to turn your back on the obvious. Which is why you're laughing at that, not just me doing this. Is you can holler, boy, I hate that. I'm not going to put up with this crowd. That's facts. And you can say it, and you can say it in a way that even some of the people around you may go, wow. And they may be fairly impressed by what? Your facts. Not your acts. Because you can say, I'm not going to put up with this. Well, there's only one way not to put up with this. Another Kairoot that got a big one tonight. Remember, those that were, the Kairoot said that those who holler for mercy are actually wanting power, and those that holler for assistance and help are actually wanting power, and those that do get around to hollering for power are actually wanting revenge, but it's a futile act because there's no way to get even for being alive. Of course there is, which is where the joke is. And so there you marching, and you can bitch, you can complain, you can say, I've about had it. I am nobody's fool. I have been studying. I have been all around the world. I've studied with, so-and-so. I've met with this rabbi. I've read books. I've taken drugs. And there's a secret. There's some kind of conspiracy in life, and they've got us here. They got most of us boxed in. Look around you. Everybody else just marching along. But not me. I understand what's going on, and I'm not going to put up with this crap much longer. All right, those are facts. Now, if you want to deal with acts, and you say, well, by God, the man sounds like he's somebody. I've heard people complain before, but this guy seems like he's somebody. And you look to see, he says he's not going to put up with it. And you wait to see, how's he not going to put up with it? There's only two things. If he keeps walking, if you keep seeing him, he's still putting up with it. Actually. Now, factually, he may still say, I'm getting closer. I've about got it figured out. I'm going to strike any day now. But as long as you can see him, it's facts. He's turned his back on the obvious. The obvious is he's not going to do a damn thing. There's nothing to be done. Well, unless you want to call that doing something. For him to say, I've had enough of this, I'm not going to put up with this, if he's going to actually fulfill that threat, then you won't see him. Because he's going to have to, weight his head on one side with a couple of grams of lead and drop, and they march right over him. That's it. To be civilized, even to pass for being intelligent, even to pass for trying to stand in the bow of the ship in a parade, if a parade was on a ship. And look out and holler, I'm captain of my fate. Don't keep doing that. You understand? Even if it appears to be inspiring, even if it strikes you as impressive, it's facts. And for you to be impressed by somebody else doing it, for you to be impressed by the history of men doing it, for you to be impressed with the appearance that institutionally, churches, religions, sciences are hollering, we're not going to put up with some of this. They're dealing with facts. There is a payoff. There is a balance. The more, not just institutions, but you individually, humanity, individually and collectively. The more they are hollering, we're going to do this, that is, we're going to progress some way in facts, the more they're having to turn their backs on what would be, from another view, what would be the obvious. That is the nature of progress. It's still the old thing about, hey, look over here. In a 3D world, it's still the good old Punch and Judy. That all you see is the two puppets. All you think is the two puppets up here. And Punch can hit Judy for a while, and then Judy can punch back. They can dance this way, and they can dance backwards. And you're looking up just at the little puppets. And below there is what? Of course, it used to be Jim Henson, but he went to the great Muppet Parade in the sky. It's still Jim Henson. You're playing Punch and Judy, and for either one of them, it doesn't matter who. But for one of them to apparently be dominant, which one of them's got to be dominant at any given time or they can't play. That is, part of your brain has got to be believing something, and the other part not believing it or they can't play. But it's all the same. And to think, well, wait a minute, fine, they punch. Let's say that you're in favor of Punch. Punch is in charge. You're turning your back on the obvious. There is no Punch without Judy. There are no facts without acts. And no particular thought is ever going anywhere within a 3D realm. That is, based on polarized energy. It will never reach a conclusion. It reaches an operative conclusion within a 3D world. I believe he got it. It would take, well, you could look at this. This would lead to the great motto, since I've given you a theorem and two new definitions. How about a new motto? Would be to say that believing in what you can't see is the American, no. Believing in what you can't see is the human way. Now there it is. Of course, you're an American, say American, because it makes people feel good until they listen to it and go, what the hell would that mean? It would take, at the very least, a kind of new or different intelligence, a kind of civilized intelligence, to be able to look at such things as 2 + 2 = 4. To be able to look at such things as everybody else's heredity and their inevitability is your environment and uncertainty. To be able to look at everything dead in the eye would take a new kind of thinking. You cannot look, not that it's right, to look and say, well, 2 and 2 is 4. Or I looked at the person and everybody's saying, well, how could somebody be like this? And you've got to get away from my examples, as you know. Because that's not the point to say, well, why is this person a drunk? Well, they drink too much. That's not it. It's that closer, relatively speaking, to the old actual level of 2 + 2 = 4. Nowadays, that's just not right. That is no longer operational. That's outdated. 2 and 2 is not 4. Now 2 and 2, whatever it is, even if it is 4, there are conditions to it. that 2 and 2 wouldn't be 4 if it had not been for them being adopted. If it had not been for the neighborhood in which they grew up. Had it not been for the poor economic outlook for the first 2 decades of their life. 2 and 2 is no longer just 4. It would take a new kind of intelligence, not to look backwards, but it would take a new kind of intelligence at another level now. It's a new level. To look it dead in the eye that, well, yeah, 2 and 2 is 4. Or that, yeah, everybody else's heredity and their inevitability is what would normally be my environment and my uncertainties. Ordinary intelligence cannot do that. It is not made to do it. That is not its function. Since this is the end of the tape, this will be the end of the tape.